morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Maria Pressentin once more. Welcome to another edition of Purposeful Leadership. I am today joined by Andrew Bryant, the self-leadership guru, very prominent figure here in Asia Pacific and worldwide. And I know him personally, so I'm really happy and thankful that he's with us for an hour's conversation today. We also have Dr. Marina Nani, who is the CEO of Radio Works World. And before we begin, there's a lot to speak about today. I'd like to, really give the kudos to Andrew and really introduce him properly. So his name is Andrew Bryant. And if you look at his career, backwards, Andrew has spent his entire life changing mindsets and developing human performance. Originally trained as a psychotherapist, graduated from London in 1982, he soon became involved in working with sports people and teams. He was frustrated at some point with lack of information on how to help people to perform better. So what he did was he studied further in psychology, neurolinguistics, hypnosis, neurosemantics, and even has a postgraduate in acupuncture. This is amazing. After moving to Australia, his results were noticed by the business sector, and he began coaching business teams to perform. Formal studies in business at the University of Western Australia and coach training from the International Institute of Neurosemantics prepared him to research and develop his own methodology, self-leadership. Andrew has published 2 books on this topic and has contributed to multiple articles on the topic of coaching and leadership. Andrew, welcome to our radio show.
Hi,
such a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, that's a long introduction. I always worry when people do that. It's such a high bar to meet. But I do need to just make a slight correction. My first degree is not psychotherapy, but physiotherapy.
Oh,
so
physiotherapy.
the actual join the dots backwards. They're easy to mix up. But it's relevant because my journey started, I guess, from the physical to the mental, and then I guess back to the whole body and the whole body, mind, and environment. So when it comes to leadership, I like to really have a holistic approach. So
Absolutely.
yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks for correcting that. That's important. You have a really powerful book out there called Self-Leadership, and to my understanding, you've got different versions of it. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay. Well, so the textbook that I wrote on self-leadership, I co-authored with Dr. Anna Kazan. And I've been writing on the topic of self-leadership since 1999. I actually thought I'd invented the term, but it turns out that there have been some researchers in the US that had been writing, Charles Mance and Neck and Horton, researchers in the topic of self-leadership. And Dr. Anna Kazan had been a student of Neck and Horton, and she saw my articles on self-leadership, contacted me. We had a couple of conversations by email, then we had a Skype. And then I said, look, I've got halfway through a book. I'm struggling with the statistics and research part. And she said, oh, well, that's my speciality. And so we had a partnership perfectly paired. And we co-authored that book, which was published in 2012, which was called Self-Leadership, How to Become a More Successful and Effective Leader from the Inside Out. And that book's on MBA programs, and so it contains our research. Interesting story, Dr. Anna Kazan and I, to this date, have never physically met. She lives in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and although I have a Brazilian wife and have visited Brazil a couple of times, I've never managed to connect with Dr. Anna. We did the whole thing, the collaboration virtually. So that in itself is success and self-leadership. In 2016, I was working with somebody around marketing and branding for my consultancy work. And he said, fantastic book. It's just a bit long. And I said, well, thank you very much. And he said, could you write a version, that people could read in under an hour? And I said, well, I guess so. And he said, and I need it by Saturday. And this was, I think this was Tuesday. So I had a busy week. So I got up at 4 o'clock every morning for 3 days and wrote the one that you read. And I wrote it without reference to the original text.
Right.
And I did that because I didn't want to bog anybody down in theory, but really just talk about the practical strategies that I've used coaching and speaking to audiences and helping people to access their self-leadership. And I thought if I just for want of a better expression, vomited that out, that it would be good. But I mean, outpouring, perhaps wrong metaphor, but I had to get it out so quickly. And what it proved was that I've been living and breathing this topic for nearly 20 years.
Right.
That it came out, and you've read it, and so it came out in a way that people can grasp. And that did very well on Amazon for a period of time, and I get letters from all around the world telling me how the book changed their lives. So that's a lovely recommendation.
Yeah, I really just wanted to read out the title. That's actually a handbook size. It's quite petite, but don't mistake that petiteness for simplistic. It's really in depth. So the title is Self-Leadership: 12 Powerful Mindsets and Methods to Win in Life and Business, and that's still available in Amazon. Is that correct?
It absolutely is available on Amazon. So, yep, by all means, go along and get that. You can
Yeah.
get it as a Kindle, or you can get it as a paperback, or
Yeah.
whatever. So, I
So
haven't done it as an audio yet. That's on my to-do list.
It's probably to-do list, right?
Yeah.
But it's definitely worthwhile to think about that path as well, because I read this book recently and I did it like, in a day or so. Coming from that field as well, I absolutely enjoyed it because it's simple, it's easy to understand language, it's got tips, and it really speaks to the core of the challenges in life, no matter what age you are. So here's the thing. One of the things that I wanted to, perhaps for us to talk a little bit about is based on this easy to read book, which is, I call it a manual or a book for us to really start thinking about where are we coming from and where we're going. There's one aspect that really shouted at me, really big on my face, saying, it's this big question about how do you switch from a position of being a victim to gaining autonomy again in your life. So do you want to elaborate a little bit about that, Andrew?
Sure. I use a personal story when I'm speaking at conferences, giving a keynote, and and I used it in a TEDx that I spoke at, and I talk about an experience that I had in the year 2000, where in the preceding 6 months, a business that I had invested a lot of time, energy, and my money into was disrupted, and I found myself in the year 2000 having gone from wealthy to broke in a very short period of time, and how that really affected me. It affected my self-esteem, my self-confidence, and robbed me of a vision of a future. And I was feeling very sad and down on myself. And I was waiting for a bus, and it started to rain, and I didn't have an umbrella. And so you can imagine my mood did not improve. And the bus comes along, and the doors open. I step on board this bus, and I'm greeted with an amazingly cheerful, "Isn't it a great day?" And my inner dialogue is telling me every which way it's not a great day, and I'm feeling like educating the bus driver in no uncertain terms that it's not a great day. But there was something about his genuineness and his authenticity that stopped me in my tracks. And I went and sat on the bus, and I had an epiphany. I had a revelation, because I saw other people getting on the bus, and I saw this guy cheering them up with this just welcoming, greeting, "Isn't it a great day?" And everybody on the bus was looking cheerful, and I'd been miserable. And I suddenly felt guilty, because I realized that this bus driver had very little autonomy. He couldn't choose his route. He couldn't choose his timetable, but he was choosing his attitude. Bus driver's not a high status profession. Imagine Maria coming home to your parents and saying, "I'm wanting to marry a bus driver." Whilst it shouldn't be about his job, society has judgments around what people do.
Right.
And And yet this guy was managing himself and influencing people. As people got off that bus, they went into banks and insurance companies or travel agencies or whatever companies they were going to, and they had a smile on their face, impacted by this man who had no formal title as motivational speaker or coach. And I was reminded at that point of the book that I'd read in my youth, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And if you haven't read that, Viktor Frankl, of course, was a Jewish doctor who was interned by the Nazis, destined for the gas chambers, but survived. And in his book, he talks about the fact that the last of all human freedoms is the ability to choose our own attitude. And he was a man driving a bus who chose his attitude. And there I was sitting on the bus, and I'd lost my business had been disrupted. I'd lost a huge amount of money. I lost my status, but I hadn't lost my health. I hadn't lost my intellect or my education. And I was feeling sorry for myself. And I had this decision from this point on in my life, I'm going to stop being a passenger and start being a driver. And it was at that moment that I really started the self-leadership journey is how do I apply this to self? There's lots of self-help books, lots of psychology, there's lots of motivations, but what actually works? I'd helped athletes to win championships and win gold medals. I'd seen transformation, but at that point I had this curiosity around, well, what's really going to make the difference? And the piece that that became most clear was around that locus of control. And the concept of locus of control is a theory that precedes my writings, and it was a piece that I researched. Is do we believe that what we think and what we feel and what we do actually makes a difference in the world, or do we believe that everything's preordained and really we're just a leaf on the stream of life? Now. Yeah, we live in Asia, and a lot of people believe in their horoscopes and predetermined, and a lot of people pray to a deity to intervene in their lives. I can't say that I know the truth of either of this, but what I do know is that if you behave as if you have control, you influence the world around you to a measurable effect. Change everything? No. All right. This week I was speaking in Bangkok. I influenced an upgrade on the flight to Bangkok, which I was very happy about. I whizzed quickly through the airport. I got a limousine to take me to the hotel, and I did that speedily, and I thought this was a wonderful journey. And then we hit the traffic on Sukhumvit Road. If you know Bangkok, that road is a traffic nightmare. And we sat in the traffic for an hour and a half. Now, there was nothing within my power to influence that traffic.
Right.
Yeah. Now, what I could have done was gone, oh, you know what? If I'd calculated my time of arrival, I should have been aware that that was a bad time to try and get down that particular road. So I could have influenced that. But at the point that I was there, it was too late. So the reality is I influenced a number of aspects of my journey. I influenced the fact that the client chose me to come and do that piece of work for them, but I didn't influence the traffic at that time. So there's a realization we influence aspects of our life. Stuff happens. Life is not fair, but we still get the opportunity to choose our attitude and choose our actions. And we are more likely to get an efficacious outcome if we take control than if we give up.
Right. So would you say that the reason you were motivated to write this book is partly based on your past experience in trying to find out more how to have that locus of control, combined with your personal experiences in life? Or would it be something else?
Okay, well, that was kind of a heavily loaded question, Maria, but so
it wasn't a coaching question, sorry.
I know. I just have to pick you up on that one.
I'm really curious about your mindset. Where did it come from?
It's a good question. I've been asked this a few times. When I lost everything, and when I had this revelation, I went up into the Blue Mountains outside of Sydney, and I basically sat, trekked through the hills, got tired and hot and sweaty, and I sat and I got this fantastic view, and I was absolutely broke. I was, as I said, $300,000 in debt, zero assets. I was living in a backpackers hostel, paying by the week. And I'd actually just been offered a $100,000 signing bonus to sign up with a medical practice and to bring my previous skills to bear on setting up a rehabilitation center. So, there was a way out. There was a job. I wasn't going to be destitute.
Right.
And I used what we know, your future self aspect. I started to sort of, well, what's the next 4 years going to be like working in this job? I had been an entrepreneur. I'd run my own company, and here I was. Okay, I was going to take the signing bonus. That wouldn't have solved all my problems. I was $300,000 in debt, but it would mean I'd stop eating tuna fish out of a can. But as I looked to that future, it just didn't motivate me. And so I reached inside. And what really gets me up in the morning? What do I really enjoy? And that was the question I asked myself. And I just realized that I wanted to make a difference. I want, when I coached athletes or worked with business people, when the lights came on and people got an aha and made a change, that's what fired me up the most. And I thought, well, I want to do more of that, and I need to be more effective at doing that. My own personal psychometric is I'm much more hard-headed than compassionate, right? So this isn't driven so much by a huge empathy for the world, although I do have a heart for a number of causes, but it was driven by a very factual observation that people need to know this stuff, and that I had a framework to do so, or I was on the cusp of a framework to do so. So the motivation was very value driven, and I wanted to do something that made a difference. I didn't want to just do another job. It wasn't it was beyond the money, even though at that time, I really had financial issues. I didn't want to work just for them. I wanted to work for purpose. And that's what pushed me forwards.
Well, that's why you're in my show, because it's purposeful leadership, and that's really cool. Andrew, thank you for that. No, it's really insightful. I mean, I know you for more than 10 years, and I really know you for being an action-oriented person, and you're really one of the most successful leadership executive coaches and really performance-oriented leadership gurus that I know here in the region, and obviously you're well known worldwide as well. So here's the thing. What type of audiences do you really deal with most nowadays? Is it kind of like the new generation of managers, like the millennials? And here in Asia, we classify millennials up to about 34, 35 years old. In Europe, it's a little bit different. Or is it the Gen X? Who is it that you deal with most?
Well, the answer is all of the above. So because I'm a somewhat mature. So I turn 57 next month. So I'm.
You look fantastic for 57.
Look. My ego never tires of hearing that. But
it's true. I only tell the truth.
Yeah, and I still feel it in my joints now. But still. So I'm a baby boomer, but I'm young at heart. I had my children late in life. So my youngest just turned 11 this month.
Right.
And so, I have children, and I actually work with, I do some voluntary and some CSR work with teenagers. So they keep me young, but I like working at the pointy end of an organization. I've worked with CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and I've worked with senior leadership teams of Fortune 500 companies. And I like working with the top. Now, although, self-leadership, starts with everybody, it starts with the front line. I like to create a self-leadership culture for an organization where the culture is creating empowerment engagement. And for that to happen, I have to work at the top.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I did a marketing exercise where we sent a survey to 500 of my clients, and it was interesting that we looked at seniority in the audience. So as a speaker, I might be talking to thousands of frontline people. If I'm facilitating a workshop, it might be middle management or senior management, and if I'm coaching, it tends to be senior management. But we found a bit of an upside down bell curve. Frontline people loved me. They were motivated and inspired.
Uh-huh.
The senior leaders got me because I come with my hard nosed kind of psychometric. I give them the evidence and I hold them accountable. If the middle management didn't always like me, they could find me arrogant, and I was puzzled by this. Uh, I know I come across as confident, but I never think of myself as arrogant, because arrogance is thinking you're better than somebody else, and it's certainly not my
Right.
worldview. I know I'm good at what I do, and because I worked hard to be good at what I do, and I'm unapologetic about that. That doesn't make me better than anybody else. Come the apocalypse, there's not going to be a lot of need for executive coaches. You want people who can grow food and fix things, right?
Yeah.
I'm very humble for around what I actually do, but I wondered why this was, and I realized that middle management really struggle with this concept of autonomy.
Mm.
Because they're stuck in sometimes a very rigid framework in an organization. They've got pressure from their front line, and then they're being dumped down upon by senior management. And when somebody like me comes along and says, these are the things that you need to do to take ownership, they're like, yeah, well, it's all very well for you to say. You don't work in this organization.
Right.
So I work at all levels. I think it's very difficult to work with the middle managers if I don't have influence on the organizational culture, other
Right.
than to
Right.
say, other than to let them know life isn't fair. But over the last couple of years, when I got that feedback, I reflected on the feedback, and because that's the nature of self-leadership, is to take the feedback, process it, take what's useful.
Mm.
And so I adjusted the way I taught the models to middle managers so that we could empower them. And I started running the psychometrics on the middle managers, where normally, because psychometrics cost a bit of money to run, normally I'd only run them on the senior leaders. And I began to see why they were struggling. And so I was able to give them some better tools and techniques. And I just came from a program with middle managers just this week in
Mm.
Bangkok. And they were transformed in a day and a half. They were visibly transformed in terms of their willingness to speak up, open up, contribute, and be creative. Um,
Yeah. And I guess
so
that makes the shift, right? Because you, as the author and the source of a lot of information in self-leadership, you apply the model on yourself. And I think that's the best trait in showing that you're humble. I always felt you do look like a big boss. I mean, your face and your posture and everything, you look like a big boss. It's no doubt about that. I think the fact that you're very action oriented, kind of like it might kind of come across very confident, and it does intimidate some people, but I think that's a huge humble trait in terms of the way you self-lead yourself, because you went deep inside and looked at how can I do better, because I'm actually swallowing this feedback and I'm going to work it out this time. And that's amazing. That's amazing.
thank you. Well, yeah, accept, adjust, advance is one of my models around
Right.
feedback. Accept the feedback. Now, it is what it is. You may not like it, but and it may not be accurate, but you accept that that's somebody's view of reality, and then what
Mm.
adjustments can be made, and then move forwards. So that's very much my motto
Mm.
around doing that. So thanks for that. Um,
Yeah. So that's
more
it's definitely, you might come across with somebody being with huge good intentions, but the impact was that, the perception of somebody of you was a certain figure, and so you've adjusted and you've accepted and you've advanced with it. Well, tell us, I'm really intrigued by the story that you just shared with us, and being vulnerable like this it's really fantastic as a self leader. So what I'm curious about in this last story that you just shared, accepting people's feedback, what made a difference in what you're now delivering to the middle management that you were perhaps not so paying attention to in the past? What made that difference, that shift?
empathy, just recognizing their worldview,
Mm.
right? So if what they were perceiving as arrogance, or was my confidence, right? So
Mm.
um, firstly, your point about me looking like a big boss, I get that. And so obviously I make a joke that, I may look like a nightclub bouncer, but that's not, but that's not my fault. That's my parents' fault. So yeah, that's that. So, and both with the teenagers I work with and the middle management is to share a story of vulnerability. And
Right.
and in fact, this audience this week really appreciated that, and they said, that really helped. And the interesting thing was a number of them opened up and were very vulnerable themselves around some of their life challenges, and then I was able to reframe that for the audience's strength. So I think, look, when we get it, when we see the world in a particular way, we can become blind to the fact that others don't see it. And
Yes.
I'm you know Malcolm Gladwell talked in his book Outliers about the concept of entitlement. Um, and he talked about, if you grow up and you expect to go to university, you're more likely to go to university. If nobody in your family ever went to university, you don't expect to go to university. So, even if you got an interview at a university, you unconsciously you're going, well, I don't belong here, and so you're going to sabotage your process. Right.
Right.
So being I was fortunate. I had a grammar school education in the UK, and so I was well educated. Went to university, and I'm a white male, and so for me, that obviously there is a level of entitlement, and I had run my own business.
Right.
I have been the big boss, and so that creates a level of expectancy as you move into. Well, I'm going to get, somebody's going to pay attention to me, and somebody's going to give me what I want if I ask for it in an appropriate time. And the empathy to realize that other people just don't see the world that way, that they lack just self-esteem, a level of self-value. They lack a level of self-confidence, and they fear speaking up for fear of being judged, and recognizing that those are issues, and then and empathizing with that. Now, there are some periods of time in my life my confidence has been rocked to the core, and I think life experience has just given me the empathy around that. So, I think it's Maya Angelou who said, but the thing with quotes these days is finding out who said it first. But I think Maya Angelou said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think because I like the facts, and I like the research, and I like the stuff, but I realized that if you go back to Aristotle 2,500 years ago, when you talk about rhetoric or influence, you need ethos, you need that character. And as you say, well, I have the physicality of the ethos, I have the research and the education for the ethos. Then you need the pathos, which is the empathy. So yes, you need to have substance to influence people, but if you don't show people you care about their scenario, they aren't going to change. And of course, the last is logos, which is the logic, and that is the last. And yet so often we're trying to convince people with logic and facts. So I've really taken on board that concept that, yes, I have to have executive presence, because if people don't see me as an authority, I can't do that transformation.
Especially in Asia.
Especially in Asia. But without the pathos, I'm not going to get the logos of my message across.
Absolutely.
And with that empathy, I just want to throw something. You may or may not know that I'm on the faculty of Women in Leadership at Singapore Management University. I
Good
collaborate,
for you.
which I collaborate with Dr. Tanvi Gautam, and I particularly teach the executive presence for women in leadership, because it's a little harder for women to demonstrate confidence without being perceived as being aggressive. And so, having that. The interesting thing there, though, is about the bias, which, if you don't mind me leading this conversation a little bit,
Please
I just
go
want to
ahead.
share. So interesting thing was you gave me a wonderful introduction today, and typically when I speak, I ask people not to do that. I'm not telling you off for doing it, but because, as I said, it's a lot to live up to. But the first time Dr. Tanvi Gautam introduced me to this Women in Leadership program, and she did a similar thing that you did. She read out all my experience, my qualifications, and these women then were on the defensive. And I went, okay, and then, I'm another successful white male, and how could, for me to build the empathy and connection with them was quite hard. So the next time we ran the program, I said, Tanvi, don't introduce me. She said, but I have to. I said, no, you don't. And so, it's on the third day of the program. The women have all worked together, worked through women issues, leadership issues, with a female facilitator. And then I walk up the front of the room and I stand there. And Tanvi just says one thing: what's different? And they'll go, there's a man in the room. So my opening statement, I just stand there for a good 60 seconds without saying anything. And then I asked them, I said, look, I've stood here. And because of the nature of the human mind, you have made judgments about me. Turn to the person next to you and share the adjectives of those judgments. Now, notice I don't ask them to tell me directly because, as you know, in Asia, people won't necessarily answer directly, but they'll tell the person next to them. Although, interestingly, with a senior leadership group, some of them did. And so they come up with the adjectives, obviously, bold, obviously, and then, of course, confident and sometimes arrogant, alpha male, aggressive, all the adjectives that come out. And then I go, thank you very much. And then I show a quick slide share, and I show, that I'm the middle son. I have 2 sisters. So I was brought up surrounded by women. I was going to do medicine, but they merged my boys' grammar school with the girls' high school just before my A-levels. So I did physiotherapy as a second choice. Now, physiotherapy in England in 1979, when I entered, was a female-dominated profession. There were 29 ladies in my class and 2 guys. And then I graduated. I wanted to work at a London teaching hospital. And the first interview I had, they said, oh, we've never hired a man before. So I've actually experienced gender bias as a man.
Yes.
Then, I got married. I had a couple of kids. That marriage didn't work out. And I ended up extensively looking after the children. My family is very dear to me, and so I show them that, and the work I do with at-risk teenagers, and then I show them a slide on that, and then I say, turn to the person next to you, is the adjective that you used initially the same, or has it changed? And a significant number of the audience will say, well, actually, no, you've updated our viewpoint. We've made a judgment bias on you. A couple of them will still stick to their original bias, but that's okay.
Right.
But the reality is that bias works both ways. Men will have a gender bias with women, and women will have a gender bias on men. And so to resolve that issue, it's both sides of the equation. And bringing this back to self-leadership is, the bias around if somebody sees somebody else as more confident than them and they're judging themselves, that's the wrong place to be. And what I tell my audiences is that confidence is not walking into a room thinking you're better than somebody else. Confidence is walking into a room not having to compare yourself with anybody else. That our job as self-leaders is not to beat the guy next to us, but to be the best version of ourselves.
That is amazing. That I've never heard before. Confidence is not to compare. Now, one of the things that you say as the tips in the handbook that I read, so obviously you've got the 12 chapters and then the mindsets. Each one of the chapters in the handbook of self-leadership is actually a single mindset, and they're all very, very valid points. And then I really love the part that talks about the tips. They're short and sweet. And one of the major things that, being somebody that is in the industry of learning and development as well, doing a lot of executive coaching, most of the time what I see, whether it's male or female, people come to me and say, I can't say no. And that's exactly one of the things that you say in that book. You've got to learn to say no, but you actually teach it in a different way than most self-help books do. Do you want to say a little bit about that? Elaborate more?
Sure. Okay. So firstly, to be a leader of self or others, we have to be decisive. And it's worth going back to, where does the word decision come from? Well, it comes from the same root as the word incision. So a surgeon cuts into, and a decision is to cut apart. So every decision has a yes and a no. Now, I've shared the world stages with some of the most famous motivational speakers. I won't do any name dropping now, but you know who they are. And a lot of them will say, you have to say yes to your dreams or yes to your vision, and very inspiring. But the reality is in life, before we can say yes to something, we have to say no to something else. The no actually precedes the yes. If you wanted to get good grades in university, you had to say no to some of the parties, all right? So before you said yes to the study, right? So if you want to lose weight, you have to say no to the pastries to say yes to the desired waistline. So no precedes the yes. The other thing that I do is in terms of teaching this, is I talk about the fact that we lost the no, or we got disavowed from the no when we're very young children. When you're 2.5, 3 years old, and you start to develop this ego, this level of independence, me, not me. Our parents said, "Don't you say no to your father? Don't you say no to your mother?"
Yes.
And so,
oh my gosh.
So I teach this by firstly teaching ownership, and I learned this originally through neurosemantics, but I've developed it with the understanding of locus of control is what do we actually have ownership of, and as a human being, our sense of personal space is built with our ownership of our ability to think, our ability to feel, our ability to speak up, and our ability to take action. And in fact, in my 2012 book with Dr. Anna Kazan, we define self-leadership as the practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions towards your objectives. And I just wanted to slip that in because a lot of people are talking about self-leadership, but they're blurring the constructs. So, you have to start with the definition. Anyway, so if ownership is I have to own my thoughts, I have to own my feelings. Now, when I grew up, I was taught to read The Guardian and The Telegraph because one was right wing, one was left wing, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And never is it more important in this age of fake news is to go, what do I actually think about this issue? And people have got very lazy about that, right? They're getting their news in YouTube bites, and you may be watching this on YouTube. Please don't think I'm knocking the platform, but don't, with confirmation bias, you've got to be very careful to work out what you think on an issue. You understand confirmation bias. People are going to search, for the if you believe the Earth is flat, then you're going to search for videos about flat Earth. You're not going to watch the ones that show you that the Earth is round. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is flat. Anyway, so that's my confirmation. Bit of British humor. British humor. So you've got to own your own thoughts, and that takes a bit of energy. What do I think about this? Which means reading things from different perspectives or talking to people from different viewpoints. Then you've got to own your feelings. And I ask people, do you own your feelings? And they say yes. And I say, well, have you ever said he makes me angry, she makes me frustrated, or they make me feel ... fill in blank? And people say, well, yeah, of course I say that. And of course, the moment you say he makes me angry is the moment you've externalized your locus of control. Whose anger is it? Well, it's always our own. If somebody cuts in front of you in traffic, I say, does that person make you angry? And my audience, without hesitation, say, yes, of course they do. And I go, no, they don't. That person did not get up in the morning and time their journey to cut you in traffic. They don't know who you are. You're not that important. Right? The fact is that person was in a hurry or a bad driver or they didn't see you or they're rude is inconsequential. The event caused you to choose to respond with anger. Now, anger's not a bad emotion. Anger's the emotion of defense, and also it's the fire for change. But I have to own my anger. I have to go, well, what am I angry about? So the self-awareness, if I'm angry, this is the heart of emotional intelligence. If I'm angry, or the seat of cognitive behavioral therapy is what's triggering this, and what's my level of control around this. So now we own our thoughts, we own our feelings, and then our words. We need to speak up, and we need to take action. And so if we take ownership, and we, I'm for people listening to this on audio, I'm gesturing a circle around my body right now. Is our sense of self extends beyond our our physical being, we have a sense of personal space, because if somebody steps
Yes.
inside your personal space, it's uncomfortable. You live in Singapore. People mark their personal space in a coffee shop with a packet of tissues and own that piece of space. The British will
Absolutely. Oh my gosh.
the British will put their towel down on a beach anywhere in the world, and they've
Those are
captured
the
that bit of the.
Germans. Yes.
Yes, well, the Germans have got the lounges around the pool. Everybody's marking their territory, and
Yes.
that level of marking and nationalism, of course, is on the increase globally. But that's another topic. So I start by saying, what's mine? What's my personal space? Because if I know what's mine, there's something I will defend. Because as a woman, as you know, if a male uninvited steps into your personal space, that's a level of abuse, isn't it? And you would push back on that, wouldn't you? Well, you would certainly want to push back on that. And I ask my audiences to really get in touch with what is so personal to you. I mean, it could be a toothbrush, as simple as a toothbrush. If even married couples don't want to share toothbrushes sometimes because it's very personal. And so what is personal to us? And because once we get that sense of ownership, we can recognize that this is really our sacred space. This is ours, and therefore we have the right to say no to anybody impinging on that. And if I get people to that raw understanding of our foundational developmental psychology, this is me. I am responsible for my thinking, my feeling, my words, my action. That's what I'm responsible for. And that's where it stops. Because outside of this circle of me is somebody else's thinking, feeling, words, and actions, and the consequences of their actions. And I'm not responsible for that. I can't be responsible. I'm responsible for my words and actions. And as a self-leader, I will take the consequences of that. But I can't be responsible for somebody else's. And so I have to say no to that responsibility. And that's huge for people, because culturally we've been told, oh, you're responsible for your wife, or you're responsible for your husband. And I'm very in people's faces with this when I say, no, you're not. Now, my wife is an intelligent, she speaks multiple languages, she's intelligent, she's even more confident than I am, confident, beautiful woman. I am not responsible for her, but I am accountable to her because we're married, we have an agreement. But I can't be responsible for her, she's grown up. And trying to be responsible for another adult is a dysfunctional relationship.
Exactly.
So we have to say, it's codependency in psychology. We have to say no. Now, I have children. Am I responsible for my children? Absolutely, because they're not yet old enough to be responsible for themselves. But my accountability to society is to raise my children to a point that they can be useful members of society by being responsible for themselves. And then I've done my job as a parent. Now, that's a whole nother topic of parents that don't raise children to be responsible for themselves. So no is the firewall between me, myself, and not me, other people. To the point that you could say this: what other people think about me is none of my business.
I'm really loving this conversation because it's taken us to a next level, and I really would love to spend a couple of minutes to explore this, if you'll allow me. All of us have children here in this call, and the leaders that are listening to this call most of us have children. So here's the thing: this is the magic, kind of like the magic question, and it could lead to something bigger. When do you start teaching children responsibility and accountability, and what's the best way to start? At what age?
As soon as they can understand the concept of consequences. And of course, that's different ages. But, children quite early can understand consequences. So let me tell you what I think is a cute story. And let's cycle back to the concept of feedback, right? So I told you a story of taking the feedback. One of the models I teach managers and leaders around giving feedback, because by the way, that's done very badly. People don't give good feedback. A model I use is FIF, fact, impact, future. Fact, what is it you're observing? Impact, what is the result of that behavior? Future, what is the future result? And when I teach this, I use a story of my daughter Tash when she was 4. And when she was 4, we moved into a house. You understand this in Singapore. It was a shop house, 3 flights of stairs, right? And so, as a 4-year-old, she was walking, but I was worried about all these stairs in this house. And I said to her, Tasha, I want you to hold on to the handrail coming down the stairs. And she said, yes, Dad. Anyway, a couple of days later, I'm walking past the bottom of the stairs. Tasha's descending the stairs and she's not holding on to the handrail. And I said, Tasha, she said, yes, Daddy. I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm coming down the stairs, Daddy. I said, what are you not doing? And she did this cute little, fingers on chin, look up in the air as she reflected. And she said, oh, I'm not holding on to the handrail. I said, that's right, Tasha. What's the impact of you not holding on to the handrail? And she had another little think and she said, fall, ouch, blood. I said, that's right, Tasha, fall, ouch, blood. I said, what do you need to do in the future? She said, hold on to the handrail, Daddy. I said, that's right, Tasha. I never had to tell her to hold on to the handrail ever again. So she, at 4, recognized, fact, my behavior is putting me at risk of falling and hurting myself. And that's within my responsibility. And in future, Daddy has asked me to do a behavior that will make me safe. Yeah. Now, that's probably a lot earlier than most people thought I was going to say around a concept of responsibility. But if a child, and her language was so cute, fall, ouch, blood, but she understood there was a consequence to her action. And that was the beginning of that education.
That's excellent. Marina, are you still there?
I'm listening. And, Andrew, I'm thinking that you must have some kind of connection with the audience already. We are receiving so many messages, and I'm very grateful for sharing in such a simple way the grand size of your concept. I don't know the word for it, but I think leading your life starts at home. And I just so love every single story you shared. And Tasha is absolutely an amazing example of what a good story can change in people's minds. People are keep emailing me about Tasha, saying hi. So there you go. You see, you lived your life. You invented or reinvented the wow. You eliminated the how, and yet people are connecting with you because of your child. And the truth to be told, leadership is not necessarily something we learn, it's something we are. And in your case, I believe that you are one of the greatest solutionaries I ever met. And funnily enough, I'm going to be 57 next month. And
we're both the same vintage.
Yes, I think so. And I feel I have 2 grandchildren. I had children very young, and now they are my friends, and they are amazing people. But I always thought that I don't need to teach them anything. I just need to listen to them because they have so much to teach us. I mean, I think my greatest challenge was to allow myself to learn from others, to learn from younger people, because they have this extraordinary ability to be curious, to be adventurous. And I think this is where I want to come back to what you said earlier, the pathos. So if there is no passion, you are not scratching the surfaces of who you could be. And I work on social edification. We build up purposeful leaders. And unlike yourself, I do very little. I just make sure your Stardust story shared across continents, is shared across generations, and you could discover who you truly are through sharing your story, because you don't have a story until you share it. So it's all about creativity. It's all about not sabotaging your self-confidence. Because as a child, remember Tasha, when you look at her, what you see, you see the most confident young person you ever seen. And when I look at people, I don't see men and women, and I see equal. And I think that's always been my challenge as a self leader. It's been always difficult for me to accept that people could see me just a woman. I thought, but I'm more than that, you know? And I look at men and they're just amazing, and they so complement the female energy in society. And I think it's really bad what is happening right now, this tendency of pushing men aside as if only women matter. And I believe that we have to start to see each other with a fresh pair of eyes, to look at each other as if we complement each other, because competition doesn't really exist. You could only compete, you rightly said it, you could only compete against yourself. And I am a better person now, an hour after I met you. Listening to you made me a better person. Thank you so much.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. No, absolutely. It takes, some people are very lucky that they don't have too much of that bias. I coached a man who, his family uh, told him he was Dutch, but actually they had Germanic origins. And the reason that they told him he was Dutch was because they were in Indonesia, and it was better to be Dutch than German. And so, but he was born in New York and then educated in London, Paris, and then grew up most of his time in Africa. And then went back to New York, and then didn't feel comfortable there, and then went back to Africa, and then ended up in Asia. And this guy does not have a bias for nationality. So when he builds a team, he doesn't see, whether the person's American or Thai, or what he sees, are they competent for the job, or he sees the potential. And he's building the most unusual teams because he just doesn't have that filter for nationality. And I interviewed him and wrote this, and I have yet to write this up. I want to put it in a book that I've got in percolation mode, and just this ability to see the person first before you see their gender or their nationality or their color or their religion or their lack of religion, or their philosophy, is it takes an effort to, and if all of us could start just seeing the person rather than a label, the world would be a much better place. Unfortunately, we struggle that the self leadership is needed in the world because of this, because there is, we're still dealing with human psyche, and human psyche is wired. The limbic system is pretty much wired to see threat, and the easiest way to see threat is to see difference. And if somebody is the different color or a different nationality or with a different accent, and that's becoming endemic, and it really is very worrying on a global perspective. So a bigger picture is not just for organizations helping, often I'm just helping two divisions to collaborate, or I'm working with a senior leadership team and just getting them to talk together. I have a story of saving a bank millions of dollars because two senior leaders were not talking to each other, and they were building an IT system each, and the bank only needed one, but they were building two because they wouldn't collaborate. And just getting these two individuals to get past that saved the bank millions of dollars because, personality. I'm often speaking on stages these days about, leadership in a VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. I'm being asked to talk about leadership in a digital and AI age, and much as we have to look at how AI and these things are going to change the world, human beings haven't changed in 300,000 years. We basically still have the needs, wants that we had. We basically have the same fear. And what concerns me is that there's this massive division in humanity right now, is that, it's almost as if we have two groups. We have standard Homo sapiens, for want of a better word, let's call them Homo normalis, who are just busily getting their needs met, and perhaps Homo intelligentsia, who is going, what, there's got to be a better way. And, this is going to get me marked as some kind of radical liberal, but there really is, it's a real shame that a lot of people are just resorting to fear-based behavior when we live in an age where we have the information to solve many of the world's major problems like pollution and food, and people are just wanting to carve out back to that piece of ownership again. They want to carve out just their job and their house or their country, and they want to keep it their way because it's very fear-based. So, the ability to get those people to step up and to see that there's a bigger picture and to let go of the fear, if I can do a little bit to that, then my time on this planet will be worthwhile.
Andrew, there's a huge implication of the next thought that I'm coming up with. This gentleman that you talked about that doesn't see any, he sees people as individual, capable and committed to a particular job, and so he builds teams based on what's valuable in front of him instead of a nationality. There's a lot of importance attributed to cultural diversity, gender diversity, and all that kind of stuff nowadays. And perhaps the initial intention on the onset about diversity was primarily to balance or equilibrate the world amongst, having equal opportunities. That's a good intention. But today I've seen in a lot of different organizations, and primarily corporate organizations, where if we have a lot of men in a particular group, in a particular geographic location, and they're really, after interviewing a lot of candidates, men and women, they are the best choice because the quota of women hasn't been fulfilled. Some of them get fired, even though they're the best people for that particular job, so that the quota of women is introduced. And it could be gender, or it could be a nationality in schools. There's not enough whatever type of nationality in that particular quota for that segment in the school. So what are your views about this?
Well, thanks for that hand grenade. You just pulled the pin out and passed.
It's a big problem. I see it as a problem nowadays. Right. It's gone to the other side.
Right. It is. And I just had a conversation today, and I support women causes. I've signed a pledge not to sit on an all-male panel as a speaker. Right. So right. I've signed a pledge that said, if it's an all-male panel, I will step down and give a woman my spot. Now, that can be a huge sacrifice for me, right. But I think there is a skew. Look, this kind of affirmative action, for women, it can backfire. There's a Canadian professor that's causing a huge stir, and he's calling it identity politics. Right. And very interesting guy, and his name just doesn't come to me just at the moment, but I think some of the listeners might know who he is. Look, the problem is that you've got to address the original bias, right? There are women that are quite competent for a role, but they don't get hired because the interviewers don't ask the same questions to men and women. They will ask a woman, "Oh, do you have children?" But no man will ever get asked that question in an interview.
Right.
So, there is endemic, bias built into the systems. And so, we have to look at redressing those biases. But just having a quota isn't the solution, because it's just actually going to reinforce a bias and a conflict. So the solution is much more complex than that. And, it goes way back to, the education of kids in schools. Do you give the girls dolls, and do you give the boys fire trucks to play with? There's a classic experiment where you put kids in dungarees and, chop their hair. And so, in fact, a group of parents who were not parents of those children, they were parents, but were asked to give random children the appropriate toy. And of course, the parents immediately selected for gender, right? And of course, what they didn't know was that they were giving a fire truck to a girl who was dressed as a boy, because when kids are small enough, you can actually pass them off. So look, so the gender bias goes all the way back. We have cultures where it's Scandinavian countries where, for history, Viking shield maidens were expected to go to war just as much as men. Israel, where the women serve as alongside the men. So there are certain cultures where gender bias is being eradicated. But the whole woe is me doesn't work either, because women will say, well, it's been unfair. The workplace has not been fair to women, but life has not been fair to men. I mean, if you were a man during the First or Second World War or during the Vietnam conflict and you were conscripted, life was not fair for you. More men have died First, Second, and the world and then subsequent world wars than women. Now, you then argue, well, the women were raped, etc. But in certain situations, life is not fair for both genders. It's a huge problem, but we need to come back. The endemic change of this is that let's bring it back to the original topic and the area of my expertise, which is self-leadership. And self-leadership is not selfish. Is that when we take ownership of our thoughts, feelings, words, and actions, interestingly, we are making sure, just like if we're on an aeroplane and the oxygen masks fall from the ceiling, we're instructed to place the oxygen mask on our nose and mouth first before assisting others. All right? Because we need the oxygen before we can help anybody else. So let me answer your very complex question by bringing it back to the zone that I can control. And that's my research on self-leadership. And that is when you take ownership of your thoughts, feelings, words, and actions, you are less threatened by other people. You step into your own strength, your confidence, and nobody can be a version of you. So I don't feel threatened that more women are stepping up into speaking, or I may lose a job and to a woman because there's a quota. In fact, I know I can count this year 3 speaking engagements where I was fully qualified to be the speaker, but the Speakers Bureau said, they decided they wanted a woman for balance. Now, I could get all upset about that, but I'm not, because I'm busy. Because what can I control? I can make sure that I'm the best version of me, and that when somebody wants my topic, they hire me as the speaker, regardless of my gender. And what we need to get to is a world where it is the right person, regardless of gender or nationality or ethnicity. And that's where we need to go. So if people are less threatened, then the bias is not as active, right? Bias never goes away completely. But,
of course.
But I don't feel threatened by somebody else getting the role. I don't feel jealous. If somebody else is successful, I celebrate that. I don't feel that the pie got smaller. I feel the pie got bigger. If somebody else, tells me, oh, I got this amazing speaking contract and I got paid this amount of money, and I'm going, well, that's bigger than I've got. I don't go, oh, I'm jealous that they got it. I'm going, wow, that means that there's a possibility for me. And if we can start shifting this back to self-leadership, self-leaders are better collaborators because they don't feel needy. They work better in a team. They work better. So this is bringing us back to our original concept. And this is what I know I can control. Can I control, national viewpoints on racism? No, I don't have influence over that, but I can influence myself. And I can show by walking my talk and by coaching and speaking and facilitating, I can show other people to feel more confident and less threatened, and therefore more inclusive.
Bravo to that, because that's really, it's hard to get there, but you definitely got there, and you're speaking about that and you're teaching about this. I say bravo to that, because that's the mindset of abundance. And I love that you take it further by saying that self-leaders are better collaborators, because once you're happy for others and that's visible to others, you would automatically attract others towards you. And that's amazing. Bravo to that. Really, really kudos to you. I know that we're just on top of the hour, almost 15 minutes. So I just wanted to wrap up by asking you one simple question this time. What are you most proud of, Andrew, over the years? What are you most proud of, and why?
Yeah, I know the answer to this. I'm gonna ramble for just a moment. I mean, there are lots and lots of things I'm proud of when the lights come on, and then, I could be proud of some of the big name companies I've done work for, and that's not the way I'm going to answer it. I mentioned I do some stuff with at-risk teenagers, and it came about because a Swiss bank who is a client of mine, I got a call and they said, look, we have this outreach corporate social responsibility program with a local charity to assist at-risk teenagers. We've had normal sort of youth facilitators doing this, and we don't think that the program is working. You coach some of our leaders. Would you consider coming and doing this? And I have to admit, initially I thought, well, how hard can it be? And I also obviously commercially thought, well, this is a very good client. Of course, I have to say yes. And then what happened 4 years ago was I turned up in front of these kids, and I started teaching some of my self-leadership stuff, but they weren't making eye contact. And in the room were mentors from the Swiss bank, and they looked completely lost. They didn't know how to connect with these kids. And I realized I was not getting their attention. I was losing their attention. My stories were too long. So, I broke out and I did some, facilitated games and stuff, and I shortened my stories. And I just stripped everything away. I realized they felt judged. And I just, psychologically was naked to them. And I said, look, this is who I am. Look, you may see me as successful, but, I've been where you are. I've had self-doubt, and I've had challenge, and I've had this. And here's what I did. And I got these kids to do what I was talking to you about today, my thoughts, my feelings, my words, my actions, and no to other people's opinions of me. And that transformed these kids. And in that first program, I started halfway through, three-quarters through I had three-quarters of the program to go, and it ended well. These kids improved their confidence and their communication and some leadership. The next year, I planned it, and I started the program, and I mentored the mentors on how to interact with the kids. And we took these kids, who wouldn't look you in the eye on the first session, and over 6 months and 10 sessions of 3 hours. At the end of this, these kids each gave a speech that would win a Toastmasters competition. And they said, look, here's where I came from. And that included, self-harm, or, being fat and bullied, or gender confused, or parents had been in jail for drugs. And, here's where my life was, and here's where I thought it was. Here's where I am now. I'm confident. And here's where I now have a future, and this is where I can see. So I gave them a structure for the speech, past, present, and future. And these kids gave this speech, and I cried, and I cried. And I was transformed. Marina has complimented me on telling simple stories. It was these kids that taught me to tell simpler stories. I can talk about I can talk about all these things in terms of, the research. I can go back to, a 1967 expectancy theory, or 1974 path goal theory, or Decky on locus of control. I can quote you chapter and verse from the research, but nobody gives a damn. When I tell a simple story that connects to the heart, people change. And I learned that through these kids. And I'm most proud of this because these kids are stepping up and becoming young youth leaders themselves now, and because it changed me, and I'm proud that I'm a better person for doing this.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you, Andrew. Really, thank you for being on the show today. Everybody, please go get his book. At least get the manual, get the handbook. It's so easy and fast to read. It's amazing. When you listen to this recording, and you read his book, and you can get it in Amazon, by the way, you'll see what he's talking about. There's deep research in there, and he made it simple. And then you can go further because he's a research guy. And he teaches at university and MBA. Is that correct?
Yes. So I'm on the faculty of the Women in Leadership, and I also do some work on the global executive development for SMU. So I teach international MBA students as well. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Can I just suggest a resource? If your listeners want to go to learning.selfleadership.com, there's some resources there for you to continue your discovery of self-leadership. So it's very simple. URL learning.selfleadership.com.
Thank you, Andrew. This is Andrew Bryant, and he's just been just over an hour with us on self-leadership. He is the self-leadership here in Asia Pacific, and there's a lot to learn from him. And thank you, Marina and Nani, for giving us this opportunity for this conversation. We're about just ending the hour with Andrew and Marina. Andrew, stay online because I just wanted to thank you privately afterwards when we finish the recording. Thank you.
Bye.
Marina.
Bye.